And welcome to another Mark Bishop Show. Well, abortion access is a major focal point this year as we mark what would have been the 51st anniversary of Roe versus Wade. That was the landmark Supreme Court decision, legalizing abortion. Since the Supreme Court overturned this decision nearly 2 years ago, anti-abortion politicians have introduced and passed a record number of abortion bans and restrictions all across the country. And this denies people the freedom to make decisions for themselves and the ability to control their lives, bodies, and futures. Nourbese Flint is the Vice President of Strategies, all above all, and I'd like to welcome her. So, welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Having access to care remains in the balance as the Supreme Court weighs a case, apparently, that will determine the future of the medication abortion. Now, this accounts for more than half of all abortions nationwide. These barriers and restrictions on abortion, they push essential care out of reach, and they fall hardest on people working to make ends meet, especially people of color, young people, and immigrants. In fact, long before the Supreme Court overturned Roe, barriers such as the Hyde Amendment denied people abortion care. So what say you, Nourbese?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that the Dobbs decision has been devastating. We've seen over 20 states have abortion bans and restrictions, with a concentration of them in the South, where we know a lot of Black and brown people live. It's not even February, and we've seen over 270 anti-abortion restriction legislation introduced. Everyday people are getting up and not having the abortion care that they need and deserve.
In response to this decades-long crisis, it's only gotten worse since the overturning of Roe, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley introduced the Abortion Justice Act, which would enshrine abortion justice into federal law by protecting patients, including immigrants and providers, from criminalization and removing systematic barriers to care, calling for necessary federal investments in abortion care, including training, research, outreach, doula care, innovation, and access. So let's look at some of the points of interest here with my guest. What about the current landscape overall of abortion access for communities since the overturning of Roe versus Wade? Pretty bad, right?
Well, I would say that, our communities are hurting. We know things like the Hyde Amendment that was actually been in place for decades, and it's a federal policy that denies people who are on federal government insurance to have abortion care. That means anybody who's military, Medicaid, Indigenous people, federal employees, they're not able to have access to affordable abortion care, which also means that people who are living on the margins can be further pushed into poverty. And so we cannot understate again how the Dobbs decision and how legislation across many of the states have been impacting folks being able to have the freedom to choose how and whether they're going to start a family and have freedom and autonomy over their bodies.
Well, I touched on it before about this big case in the Supreme Court at the moment, the implications for Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine versus FDA. This is the one currently before the Supreme Court, which could roll back access, couldn't it, to safe and effective medication abortion nationwide?
Yeah, this is an unprecedented case. It should have been a case that went to the Supreme Court, and it's really an example of how our courts have been politicized. But even with all of that, we know that this could have dire consequences for abortion access. It could make it harder for medication abortion to be available, and that's not only in places that are restrictions. That's across all 50 states. And this is even though that medication abortion has been shown for the last 20 years to be safe and effective.
What's your feeling on the impact of abortion restrictions and bans on communities of color and people? The ones that are working to make ends meet, like the Hyde Amendment. And this does deny, insurance coverage of abortion care for people who are working to make ends meet. I mean, some could say, what about more responsibility? It's not as easy as that, is it?
No. So we know that restricting Medicaid coverage of abortion forces 1 in 4 low-income women seeking abortion to to carry an unwanted pregnancy to term. The Hyde Amendment disproportionately impacts folks of color, like you said, and that is, again, people should have the right to be able to choose how and when and whether they start families. And that's a core piece. There was research that was released this morning that showed that 3 out of 5 people believe that our Congress should be pushing forward abortion justice or abortion forward legislation. And that the vast majority of people agree that abortion should be legal.
I'm talking with Nourbese Flint, Vice President of Strategies for All Above All. By the way, what's the website people can go to?
Yeah, so you can check us up at allaboveall.org, or you can find us on X and our Instagram at allaboveall.
Now, let me ask you this question, right? What lawmakers on federal, state, and local levels, what can they do, in your mind, right now, to ensure that abortion care is available, affordable, keyword affordable, and accessible?
Yeah, so 2024 is a pivotal year. And so we're looking for legislators to do a couple of things. The first is that if you're on the federal level, we want you to support Abortion Justice Act and to co-sponsor it. But we also want to hear how you are making sure that abortion access is affordable in our communities. And so we're listening for that, particularly as voters, and paying close attention to what our legislators are saying.
Yeah. What about listeners? What about listeners and viewers, media-wise? How can they get involved and engage with their elected officials and, tell them to support Abortion Justice Act and to break down the barriers? I mean, can people really do something?
Yeah, and so this is a fight that needs all of us, and people can absolutely do something. Our elected officials represent us, and so we need to call them and tell them, particularly if they're in Congress, to support the Abortion Justice Act, but also ask them what their platform is on abortion. The second piece, what I think is super important, is that we are the best messengers for our families and friends. So we should be the ones that talk to our friends about why abortion access is needed and the fight for us to push forward. If you need help or resource with that, we have tools online, so you could come and contact us at allaboveall.org. And again, find us on Twitter or X and Instagram, where you can help and get the tools that you need to help us win this fight.
Yeah, well, Nourbese, look at those marches. They're getting bigger and bigger. I mean, let's face it, for nearly 5 decades, the policy has denied insurance coverage of abortion for people working to make ends meet. And, of course, the bans on insurance coverage of abortion, I think the numbers are 1 in 4 low-income women to carry an unwanted pregnancy to term, which drives people even further into poverty as far as communities of color are concerned, young people and immigrants. So your final point on that would be what?
Yeah, this is just another piece where we need to fight for the things that we know are important to our communities. This is not a dividing issue. The vast majority of people agree that abortion access should be available, affordable, and accessible to all. So our politicians are out of step with our community, and we need to be making sure that we're holding them accountable and that they are working to push abortion justice forward.
Now, it's very simple to learn a lot more, read about, you've got lots of things going on, lots of points of view, and this is on HTTP, of course, www.allaboveall, that's ALLABOVEALL. All right, all one sentence, www.allaboveall.org. O-R-G, folks, not com.org. Okay, it's important. It's a non-profit. I wish you luck. I wish you all the best in the world. You've got a massive battle, and there are those that need your help big time. And I thank you for giving me some time today.
Thank you. And we're all in this together, so we need your help too.
Have a good week.
You too.